Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. So today we are having a Duncan Jones, and Duncan is a Chartered Resources and Waste Manager and member of the Chartered Institution of Waste Management. He has over 26 years experience covering a range of disciplines, from client-side roles through to senior leadership positions in a direct service organisation, successfully working across two-tier structures. As well as being the Partnership Development Manager for the Hertfordshire Waste Partnership, Duncan is chairman of the award-winning Hertfordshire Flytipping Group, which is a multi-agency task force with, which is in addition to Hertfordshire's 11 local authorities, includes the Office of Police and Crime Commissioner, the Hertfordshire Constabulary, the Hertfordshire Fire and Rescue, the Environment Agency, and the National Farmers Union. So you will obviously be hearing a lot more about that. But before we start, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about Waste Aware and the Herts Waste Partnership. So we are a partnership of all 11 councils within Hertfordshire, set up in 1992, aimed at reducing waste and encouraging recycling. Between us, the 11 councils within the HWP are responsible for providing waste management services to over 1.1 million residents in 490,000 households across the county. The HWP's Waste Aware team, of which I am one of the coordinators, seeks to reduce waste by encouraging positive behaviour and change in all residents. So before I hand over to Duncan, just a couple of housekeeping items. We've put you all on mute as you came in, and if you wouldn't mind, could you please stay on mute throughout the session? If you have any questions, just pop them in the chat, and I will be keeping an eye on them as Duncan is speaking, and we'll have plenty of time at the end for a Q&A session, so I can then put those questions forward to Duncan at the end. The session is also being recorded, so if you don't catch everything, that's fine. I will be sending out a link of the video after the session, so you'll have the opportunity to rewatch it if you wish to. So without further ado, I will hand over to Duncan.
Right, thank you, Helena. If you bear with me a second while we get teed up, we can crack on with this morning's presentation. Okay, bear with me a second. Right, so fly tipping. Not a very nice topic, but something that hopefully will set in context for you this morning so you can understand the efforts that we are going to behind the scenes, not only in Hertfordshire, but Hertfordshire in many respects is leading the fight nationally to try and tackle this most unwelcome of issues. So let's give some relevant background so we can put it in a Hertfordshire context. As Helena said in her introduction, the HWP, the Herts Waste Partnership, includes 11 waste authorities. There are 10 boroughs and districts in the county, as you will know. These are waste collection authorities that have a primary responsibility for dealing with fly tipping. And then the 11th waste authority is the County Council as Hertfordshire's waste disposal authority that in some respects has responsibilities with respect to the rights of way network, which is part of the highways network, and in some circumstances also disposing of the fly tipping that is collected. As 11 authorities, we have a combined budget of £88 million per annum. About £46.6 million of that is spent on waste disposal, which is basically everything that goes for energy recovery, the processing of organic wastes, and the payment of recycling credits for all the dry recycling collected from the curbside, as well as the network of 17 recycling centres that are dotted across the county. The remaining £40-odd million, £42 million from that balance is spent by the boroughs and districts on waste collection, recycling and street cleansing. In 2019-20, we recycled 52.3% of our overall household waste arisings, which is our best result to date, although subject to the Q4 results, I suspect that once the final figures for 2020-21 are finished, we will find that recycling rate has edged up slightly. One of our most amazing statistics, though, I think, actually, is that if you think about household waste, for every 100 tonnes of household waste that arise in Hertfordshire, either at the curbside or through the network of recycling centres, 83, just under 84% of that is diverted from landfill through recycling, composting, or our existing use of energy recovery. So Hertfordshire has had a fly tipping group for some years, and in 2015 it was brought in under the responsibility of the Main Hearts Waste Partnership Group. So in addition to facilitating that group, as Helen said, I also run the Flytipping group. And importantly, we try within that group to include all the various stakeholders that have a professional or strategic interest in dealing with and minimising and ultimately stopping fly tipping. So in addition to our local authorities, we include both the Herts Police and separately the Office of the Police Crime Commissioner. And I'll come on to some of the advantages of that, having both organisations separately represented in a second. We also have the Herts Fire Service. The Environment Agency, as you would suspect, has a big role to deal with fly tipping. The NFU, the National Farmers Union, who are really there to represent the interests of the farming community, which align to a very large extent with private landowner issues as well. We also incorporate the community safety partnerships that exist across the county, as well as an organisation called M25 Connect, through which we, on occasion, will get some very important intelligence with respect to the more organised elements of fly tipping. In 2019-20, we recorded just over 11,200 incidents of fly tipping across the county, which is 11,208 too many. However, relative to Hertfordshire, it was the second lowest annual total recorded since 2012. We're not yet in a position to publish our 2021 figures because they're subject to checking and audit, but I suspect and fully anticipate that the numbers will be going up as a result of the pandemic. In terms of cost, if you look at the physical clear-up costs combined with the enforcement costs, so this is the cost of enforcement action and employing enforcement officers going to court, that sort of thing. Fly tipping cost Hertfordshire residents just over £1 million in 2019-20. Again, I suspect a figure that will go up slightly in 2021. And clearly, what could we spend £1 million on if we weren't spending it on fly tipping? What could £1 million do for school budgets? What could £1 million do for children's services? So it's clearly, there is a massive opportunity cost when having to deal with fly tipping. In February 2018 and in May 2018, the FTG, the Herts FTG, the Fly Tipping Group picked up 2 awards. First one from the Keep Britain Tardy, where it was awarded the best partnership for dealing with fly tipping. And then in 2018, in May 2018, we picked up the ADEPT award. ADEPT is the Association of Directors of Environment, Planning and Transport. These are the senior officers from across the local government family, where we won the best award for the best project for improving the environment. In 2018, November, we became an ambassador for the Right Waste, Right Place. This is an initiative being run by representative bodies from the private waste industry that are trying to align their work in this area with the stuff that we're doing in Hertfordshire. And in December 2018, the Herts FT was one of only about 4 or 5 local authorities from 366 in the UK that were cited for their work on this area in the National Resources and Waste Strategy. So that gives you the background. So let's start diving into some of the details. So in Hertfordshire, we are very, very lucky that we have a Police and Crime Commissioner who is both a former borough councillor as well as a former senior county councillor. So from my perspective as chair of the Fly Tipping Group, there was a whole bunch of dialogue and learning I simply did not have to undertake and do with the political oversight for this function. As a borough, former borough and county councillor, the Police and Crime Commissioner absolutely understands the local government perspective when it comes to dealing with fly tipping, and has from day one been an absolute keen supporter, not only in political terms, but obviously in funding terms, as I'll come on to try and tackle this problem. So as you can imagine, fly tipping is always a local issue when it comes to local elections, and reflecting that back in 2016, the Police Crime Commissioner put together what was termed at the time the Nuisance Fund, which was a project fund worth 400,000 over 4 years, 100,000 for each year, where various organisations, not just the FTG or the HWP, but any organisation in Hertfordshire could apply to this fund to deal with tackling this problem on a challenge basis. So you'd have to bid into the fund. Those bids were assessed against an agreed criteria, and if you were successful, you were awarded funding. One of those criteria was match funding, so it wasn't 100% funding for any project. So in 2016-17, as we see there, of the 100,000 that was available, the FTG secured £82,000, which when added together with the funding from the bidders, brought up the total value to just over £115,000. And then again in 17-18, we secured another 43,700, bringing it up to just over 58,000. Because we operate in a political sphere, we report on a quarterly basis to our senior officers and our members with respect to what's going on with fly tipping, with those same reports also made available to senior colleagues at the Commissioner's office and at the Herts and Stabbury as well. Moving on to the next slide. So this is just an example of some of the numerous projects that have been funded through this process since the Fly Tipping Group was reconstituted and relaunched in its current form back in late 2015, early 2016. And as you can see, there's a whole mix here between improving our enforcement capability. So this is things like cameras, covert and overt cameras to both deter and catch fly tippers and prosecute them when we do, all the way through to proactive promotions and campaign work, which I'll major on later on in the presentation. But what we're trying to do through these projects is both have a balance of improving our ability to enforce, but also recognizing that it's not just about enforcement, it's about trying to stop a set of decisions taken by individuals and organizations that result in a fly tipping incident. And I'll show you some of those examples later on in the presentation. So some of our highlights. Believe it or not, still in law, there is not an agreed definition of fly tipping, which makes it problematical when comparing results between different boroughs and different partnerships across the country. Hertfordshire Waste Partnership is one of about 50 similar organisations across the UK. But when it came to fly tipping, we didn't actually have a common definition. There was guidance, but when I took over and asked the question about, okay, tell me what your interpretation of the guidance is, I had 10 different versions. So one of the first things we did as a fly tipping group is we agreed what the common definition going forward would be. We review that on an annual basis to make sure that through experience it's still relevant. And in essence, it's one black bag and above. Something that's one black bag and above or equivalent to would be regarded as fly tipping. Something below that would be regarded as littering. But that now has since 2016 given us a very clear definition of fly tipping for which to judge and compare between Hertfordshire authorities and with external agencies. And where possible, we share that definition with other groups outside of Hertfordshire. Quite rightly, the Police Crime Commissioner is partly driven, a lot of what he does is driven by data, as it should be. Good data normally equals good policy. And one of the things that we were very keen to establish early on was monthly reporting in Hertfordshire for fly tipping numbers. Now, legally, local authorities across the country are only required to report their fly tipping stats on a quarterly basis, which we don't think is good enough in terms of being able to react to trends and problems. So in Hertfordshire, we have a agreement that was linked to the funding that I spoke about in the previous slide to report that data on a monthly basis. And those reports go into Waste Data Flow, which is a database run by the government, operated by DEFRA, the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, which is the main ministry which governs what we do in this area. And Waste Data Flow is a public-facing database, so any individual can open up an account and interrogate that data for themselves. A big part of what we do behind the scenes is we're working with DEFRA and the Sentencing Council to look at the guidelines to see how those are being interpreted by the courts to make sure that the deterrent factor is there, as I call it. And I have to say at this point in time, I think our ongoing standing conclusion is that typically, whilst we on occasion will get a very good magistrate's result with a very significant fine, they're very few and far between. So one of our ongoing concerns and one of the areas that we continue to focus on is trying to prompt a review of those guidelines to make magistrates really properly understand the impact of fly tipping at a local level. In 2016 and in 2020, we were given some additional tools for fly tipping as local authorities. We were given FPNs, fixed penalty notices, and they're really there to discharge what is deemed to be low-level offences. Now, that's a bit subjective because the guidance is quite clear that where possible, we should go to court. But for really low-level offences where the public interest isn't served by going to court, we have the option to serve either Section 33, that's for fly tipping offences, or Section 34, which is where someone that has waste to get rid of hasn't following the proper duty of care code in making sure they pass their waste to a bona fide waste disposal contractor. Some years ago, a couple of years ago, we commissioned Keep It and Tidy to do a research and innovation report into why people fly tip. There's no light bulbs in there. There's no unique Hertfordshire reasons as to why some people fly tip. These are reasons that are common across the UK. And I would wager that if we were to have a brainstorming session within 20 minutes, we could probably come up with most of what these reasons are. But it was important to independently research that as the basis for forming policy going forward. We have something called the Scrap Fly Tipping campaign, which I will major on later on in the presentation, so I won't talk about it too much. But that's now a national campaign being run by over 100 local authorities across the UK. We are very keen to demonstrate when we do get prosecutions that we make a big play of those. So when we do land a good result from the courts, you'll see lots of nice coverage in the local press about who's being prosecuted and why. I personally would like to publicly shame and name, but that's deemed not to be acceptable at the moment in Hertfordshire. We also have a fly tipping protocol that is common to 9 out of 10 districts in Hertfordshire and the County Council that deals with and highlights which authorities need to take the lead on dealing with fly tipping on the highway, which can be quite a complex area because of the way it's set up in law. We're also currently considering putting together a new protocol for dealing with fly tipping on private land. Whilst local government has no responsibility for fly tipping on private land, we are clear in Hertfordshire that we need to be cited on the issue. And as local government, we need to do what we can to help private landowners deal with that menace. And one of our ongoing projects is what we call the FTG lobbying paper. Now, this is basically where over the last 4 to 5 years, where a colleague from across Hertfordshire, or indeed at this point across the UK, has highlighted a potential deficiency in the way that the legal framework is set up. We have logged that and have turned that into a lobbying paper that has been sent to various national level organisations and is currently the subject of much debate, and hopefully shortly some changes to the law that will help level the playing field. So for those that like numbers, let's just take a look at the numbers going back to April 2012. So on the left of this graph, you have April 2012 up to, on the right of this graph, should be February 2021 as the most up-to-date numbers. Now, if you look around the end of the last financial year, so the financial year that ended, where my cursor is now on the screen, so the year ending March 2020, you could see that in the preceding 3 or 4 years, we'd had a nice downward trend in the amount of fly tipping, and we were absolutely getting on top of those numbers. The provisional numbers I've included from April 2020 onwards are provisional because they've not been audited yet. They will be done in the next few months. You can see there's been a massive jump in the amount of fly tipping as a result of the pandemic. Not uniform across the country. Some areas have reported further reductions. Some areas like Hertfordshire have reported big increases. Most of this will be down to what we call household fly tipping. So everyone thinks fly tipping is criminals, the man in a white van doing jobs for cash. Actually, the vast majority of the number is household waste that hasn't been properly disposed of. And this is what's represented in this big spike here. Breaking it down a little bit, this is from April 2012 to March 2016, and you can see there was a clear upward trend. Now, when I used to do this presentation and then flick across this graph here, the black line, which is simply a trend line, used to be on a nice downward trajectory going left to right. But as you can see, because of the impact of the last 12 months, that is on the up again. The red line there, incidentally, is just a moving annual average. Okay, so enforcement. We have two ways to enforce against fly tipping. The issue of fixed penalty notices, and you can see here starting in 2016-17 when the law was changed to give us this ability, we started to issue fixed penalty notices. And you can see between 2016 and 17 there was a slight drop in prosecutions. You'd expect that with an FPN that was available but took some time to bed in. You'd expect as more FPNs are issued that the number of prosecutions would go down. And then something that's been repeated between 2018, 19 and 2020. And in 2020, we've got the additional new Section 34 FPN there. But by putting together a prosecutions law, which we circulate on a quarterly basis to all Hertfordshire stakeholders, something very interesting started to happen. I literally would see colleagues sitting next to one another in a meeting, looking at the law going, well, you know, this fly tipping prosecution you've got, we've done something very similar in our borough, but when you look across at the right-hand side of the fine, the cost, the compensation, the victim surcharge, very similar offences were resulting in very different levels of costs awarded by the courts. And quite often that's down to the quality of the case file that's submitted to the court and therefore the position that the magistrate is in rendering a judgment. And what we're starting to see is a gradual equalisation to a better and higher standard of case files presented to the courts, hopefully resulting in better prosecutions. Since April 2016, as noted here, we've had 182 prosecutions going through the court. These are successful prosecutions. But as you can see, it's not evenly spread across the county as a whole. In fact, over the last 5 years, one of our boroughs hasn't prosecuted anybody, and in Welland Hatfield, prosecutions only happened last year. In 2016. Broxbourne, one of our smaller boroughs, is responsible for around half of the prosecutions in the county as a whole. The difference being there that in Broxbourne, from the enforcement officer all the way up to the chief legal officer and the chief executive and the elected members, there is an absolute desire and will and determination to prosecute as hard and as often as possible. And you can see that reflected in their very good numbers. Something we are working on in terms of equalising that approach across the county. So what issues are we currently working on? Well, at a national level, based on all our lobbying that we're currently doing, a couple of priority actions. We want to ban cash. We believe cash is a massive magnet for illegal activity because it's untraceable. We know that in the 21st century, there are a number of bona fide, a sufficient number of bona fide, properly set up, properly managed, properly licensed waste management companies that if as a householder you are contracting with them to take away large amounts of waste, they can give you a cashless payment, a number of cashless payment options. There is absolutely no need for proper waste management companies in the 21st century to insist on payments in cash. And therefore, we want to see it banned on a national basis, and it's a viewpoint supported by most local government commentators. Site waste management plans. We used to have a situation where a big building job used to have a requirement to have a site waste management plan. But these were culled in a previous red tape challenge put forward by the government. We are lobbying for their reinstatement and for those plans to include a dedicated section on how to deal with the risk of fly tipping. If you think about it, we all know there are big construction jobs in Hertfordshire as well as close to the border, especially in London, where these jobs will run 18, 20 hours a day. And we know that those that sign the contracts at the board level in these big construction companies won't really have an up-to-date understanding of who's taking their waste out at 4 o'clock in the morning, especially when those arrangements have been subcontracted 3 or 4 times. Therefore, we want the plans reinstated and for a specific section to highlight what actions at board level the construction companies will take to ensure that fly tipping, the waste that emanates from their site, isn't fly tipped. We want section 34, this is duty of care offences, to be recorded. If I'm a serial fly tipper, at the moment, if I was prosecuted 10 times under section 33, the fly tipping offence, a court could look that up, or an enforcement officer could look that up and therefore present that as part of a case file and context if I was being prosecuted again. If I'd been done for 10 previous offences under section 34, because it's not an imprisonable offence, It's not on the police national computer, and therefore we think this is wrong, and we want to see it changed. If you think about the big fly tipping events where it's the organised criminal gang element, one of the clear characteristics that you see is that they move a lot of waste very, very quickly. They're very good now. If you forget about the illegal aspect of it and the negative aspects, as a logistical operation, they're very, very good at what they do. And therefore, for the public sector to respond effectively, you need to have local government, the relevant local councils, the police, and the Environment Agency react in a coordinated fashion together, and at least, if not quicker, than the fly tipping event is taking place. That rarely happens. And therefore, as a result of that, we're suggesting, on Hertfordshire's suggestion to government, there needs to be a review of the appropriate powers with respect to who has seizure powers and who has arrest powers. Because much like a fire triangle, if you take one side of that, one of those three organisations away, i.e. they can't respond in the time required, then it severely limits the quality of the public sector response. And as a result, we often end up picking up fly tipping after it's been dumped, as opposed to stopping it in its tracks. We think that there's an issue around the lack of documentation that people have to have with respect to waste loads that they're carrying. And there's certainly a lack of enforcement around it, and we want to see that made clearer in law. And just pragmatically, a good enforcement officer will be out before 6 o'clock in the morning and out after 6 o'clock at night. The waste industry generally moves waste, recycling and disposal materials between the hours of 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. If you see waste vehicles out after those hours, as an enforcement officer, those are the sorts of vehicles that I would be stopping to find out what's going on. And as part of that, I'd want to see proper documentation. I've already mentioned the review of the 2014 sentencing guidelines. If you consider that the Sentencing Council on a daily basis will receive lobbying efforts from various stakeholders across the country with respect to possible changes in the law in its entirety, our job in Hertfordshire is to try and persuade them to prioritise a review of the legislation linked to fly tipping and to make the guidelines, to update the guidelines to make sure magistrates can render tougher judgments on a much easier basis. For example, just to give you one example, would you believe it or not that in the sentencing guidelines, the size of fine and levy you will get as a fly tipper is subject to your ability to pay. So, if you're reasonably well off and you get convicted of fly tipping, the guidelines will render a fine, which in financial terms it will be higher as opposed to someone that has no means. We don't think that's a sensible approach, and we think there are other options around community sentencing which can be used. Or locally, we're looking at the ins and outs of possibly joining up the legal services to deal with fly tipping across the county. You noted in that previous slide how good Broxbourne are. Well, we want to bring the Broxbourne approach to the other authorities across Hertfordshire so we can equalise upwards to a new standard. We continue to engage with private landowners, and actually we run, with the Police Crime Commissioner's Office, we run a special fund whereby private landowners, and by private landowners I mean mainly farmers that have been subject to fly tipping, they can seek assistance through this fund with respect to target hardening and other measures to protect their land. And we've been doing that now for a number of years. Digital offences. If you were to log on to any local Facebook page in Hertfordshire, any local community Facebook page, within minutes, if you know what to look for, you can find an illegal waste operation. You can find someone advertising a waste service that very likely doesn't have the proper licenses, doesn't have the proper procedures, doesn't have proper payment processes, and will, in essence, will take stuff away for cash. They're so easy to find. And we've seen the rise of social media drive this type of behavior where, the householder is putting up messages on such sites saying, I have an old dishwasher or half a ton of soil from my back garden. Who can take it away from me, please, at cheapest cost? And someone says, yeah, I can do that for 20 quid. Well, you just know that's going to be fly tipped. So we're looking at moving into the digital space to see what we can do to tackle that. Intelligence sharing is also a massive issue. At the moment, generally across the UK, we don't have a centralised intelligence sharing database for dealing with fly tippers. And for those that have ever worked in this field, you'll understand that once you get one or two pieces of the puzzle, you can very quickly identify various different ways to tackle fly tipping, and something I call the Al Capone effect. For those that know their history, Al Capone was put in prison for tax evasion. Yeah, he wasn't put in prison for being a mobster and a gangster and a murderer. He was done for tax evasion, and we can tackle fly tipping the same way. I don't care if I prosecute a fly tipper for fly tipping. If I can take a fly tipper out by prosecuting them for a vehicle offence or a road traffic offence or for an insurance offence or for a drug offence, because quite often fly tippers are involved in lots of other criminal areas of activity, then I don't care what the offence is. If I can use something to interrupt, disrupt and prevent their activity, then that has to be a good thing. And that's where the use of ASB legislation comes in, antisocial behaviour legislation comes in, which gives us a whole range of different tools to tackle people that are fly tipping for commercial gain. So I just want to quickly talk about our Scrap Fly Tipping campaign in Hertfordshire. So when I took over the fly tipping group back in 2016, I realised that we weren't doing a lot of campaigning. The campaigning that was being done was a bit disjointed and none of it looked the same. And therefore, I wanted a campaign that, if you bear in mind the range of stakeholders in the fly tipping group has, I wanted a campaign that they could all use either individually or in any combination. And so we set about creating the fly tipping campaign. It was based on the Keep Britain Tidy research, the headlines of which you can see there. So 28%, just under 30% of people know what the duty of care is. And I'll come on to this later on, but we all have a duty of care to make sure we pass our waste to a correct and proper person for waste disposal. And if we don't, we can be prosecuted. The level of awareness at 28% on that fact is quite low, and that's something we wanted to address. Whilst 50% of those surveyed knew that fines and prosecutions were a possibility for fly tipping, only 11% thought that there was any chance that you'd get caught. So again, there's an issue there with us publicising what can actually happen if you're caught for about fly tipping. When we put some test questions into the same survey, actually 40% of respondents admitted to doing at least one fly tipping action in recent times, with 31% saying they'd carried out 2 more acts of fly tipping. So this could be leaving stuff outside a charity shop, which people think is a positive, beneficial action, but in terms of fly tipping, is a negative. And these are people that you'll know. These are doctors and lawyer types. These comes from all walks of life and all personal situations. This is not specific to a certain part of society. This covers society as a whole. So we had to take these kind of issues into account when designing our fly tipping campaign. So it started with the publication of a specialised leaflet, which we turned into a 4-page pull-out, which appeared in the penultimate County Council magazine, which came out a number of years ago. And since then, and on a regular basis, the Hertfordshire boroughs and districts will send out this leaflet to either one or two have done an entire borough drop, or the preferred method is to target areas where we know there are hotspots. We also, moving into the digital space, as I talked about previously, we're very, very big on designing imagery around our use of social media. And we have a number of different social media channels, from Facebook to Twitter to Instagram, plus one or two others, I believe now, where these messages will go out. It's quick and easy to do, easy to target, and easy to share. And there's just a couple of key themes that we have here. This is the SCRAP code. So you can see SCRAP stands for Suspect All Waste Carriers, which you should do. Check with the Environment Agency to make sure who you're giving your waste to is a correct and proper person. If you get unsolicited offers to take your waste away, refuse them, because they're normally motivated purely by money. Ask what happens to your waste. You need to do that to fulfill your duty of care requirements as an individual, and make sure you get paperwork. At the end of the day, if I'm a fly tipper, if you're an individual and you pass your waste to me but don't do the necessary checks, you as an individual can be prosecuted. If I give you the correct paperwork and you've demonstrated you've undertaken your duty of care checks, then it will minimize your chance of getting prosecuted. The kind of wording, if you like, in our imagery here is designed to be quite blunt. There's nothing polite about it. It's designed to get a reaction. And I recall that when we launched this a couple of years ago now, actually, I was engaged on social media at the time by a particular political party in Hertford who frankly thought we were being a bit rude and a bit blunt, which obviously we disagreed with, but for us it was great because it gave the campaign lots of extra coverage. So the kind of terminology that we use in the campaign is all about clarifying what people's responsibilities are, and keep saying, using terms like it's your responsibility, it's about your paperwork, asking you what you've done as individuals to make sure you're not fly tipping. Fly tipping means different things. So, you know, in Hertfordshire, we've got inner city areas such as Watford, all the way up to leafy suburbs such as North Hearts. So fly tipping can mean different things, and these set of images here were really designed to reflect the types of fly tipping that we get. So in the top left, that's the typical fly tipping you'll get in some of our leafier suburbs, where fly tipping is dumped in a country lane. You get lots of fly tipping outside charity shops, which was a particular problem during the pandemic. Fridges is a particular problem, has been over the last couple of years, where we're getting bulk loads, probably coming out from London, dumped in the middle of the night in a farmer's field. And if you think about it, if I'm a professional fly tipper based in London, I can be into Hertfordshire, dump, and back inside the M25 in under an hour, especially at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. In some parts of the borough, as you can see on the bottom right there, we get a particular issue with fly tipping next to street cleansing bins. And we also get a particular problem on some of our bring sites, which frankly has resulted in a lot of our bring sites now being removed on a permanent basis. So fly tipping in different parts of the county can mean different things. I mentioned private land and farmers a number of times. Part of our campaign looked to include this element because they are part of our community and they do suffer and largely have to incur the cost themselves, which can run into the tens of thousands of pounds if you're a large farmer. So part of the Scrap Fly Tipping campaign deliberately targeted private land and was delivered by our NFU partners, which was great for me as chair because I didn't have to worry about the local rollout. But we've had a number of farmers supporting the campaign across the county and continue to do so. We also believe in trying to get the general public to help us. So we created these signs that we gave to various rambling groups and other organisations and other counties as well to help push the message out beyond Hertfordshire. For those that are eagle-eyed, you'll see that's Matt Allwright in the top in the middle there from the BBC Watchdog programme, who helped launch the campaign in Buckinghamshire. In terms of talks, we've done around 20 to 30 talks since we launched the campaign back in 2018. Basically, I've gone all over the country talking to other waste partnerships and colleagues in an attempt to get them to adopt the campaign, which you'll see we've been quite successful on. So this is an up-to-date map that shows you our current coverage. Obviously, our main focus is England. So the map on the left is the situation as of this month. The green areas highlighted in green are those that have rolled out the Scrap Fly Tipping campaign. That covers 102 local authorities. The ones in orange have the campaign but are yet to roll out. Dorset, we believe, is the next one that will do so. And those in yellow are local authorities that are engaging with us but have not yet come on board. And then you can see we're also making a push into Scotland and Wales. That is coverage that the government would absolutely kill for. That is coverage that Keep Britain Tidy would absolutely kill for. Now, let's be clear. We're giving our toolkit away free of charge. Now, we've gone through a process of identifying and putting into a single place through the campaign all the best practice in terms of public messaging. And therefore, we were very clear from early on that we wanted all local authority partners across the country to be able to benefit from that work and not have to reinvent the wheel, which is why we've had so many come on board. So we have we have under 102 as of today, with potentially 100 more in the pipeline. Put it in context, the UK has 363 primary local authorities. So, as I say, we've got very good coverage, but are pushing onwards to try and expand it even further. These are just some images from around the country. You've got Norfolk, Cambridgeshire here, Buckinghamshire here. For anyone that watched the Life of Grime and the fly tipping programs on Channel 5, in the bottom right there, the chap on the right-hand side holding the sign up, that's David Rounding. He's the chap I go to when I'm confused about fly tipping. He's the chap that some of you may notice from some of those programs. The Scrap Fly Tipping Hollywood sign at the top there is from Malvern District Council out in the West Country. So you can see we're looking to establish a national reach as far as we can. The toolkit is updated on a regular basis, and you can see here the number of updates that have gone out since launch. Obviously, the pandemic has put a big break on that at the moment, but as lockdown continues to ease, there will be new updates coming forward. And basically, when someone comes on board, we make them a joint owner of the campaign material. And we now have an online portal where all those materials are stored and can be downloaded. And any partner authority within the 102 that have signed up, if they identify a particular gap in the messaging, they can design a brand new message. They have to do it in the same style and keeping as the rest of the campaign. And as part of that, they then have to supply and perform the new message to us, which we then add to the toolkit. And so over time, the toolkit continues to grow as gaps are identified and plugged and new material is brought on stream. And that's just an example of some of the new images that have been generated since the campaign originally launched. So I just wanted to end the presentation by taking you through the kind of things that can happen in terms of decisions that end up in a fly tipping event. So if we just remind ourselves for a second what the Struct code is about, it's designed to be a quick, easy reference mechanism that people can refer to make sure they run through a checklist before they give their waste away. So first and foremost, do not respond to cold callers or leaflets with unexpected offers for waste disposal. Properly run waste management companies don't need to advertise like that. If someone is advertising like that, there is a good bet that they're doing something that isn't legal. Cash offers, massive red flag. If someone's giving you a cash deal, it's untraceable, and therefore you have to question their motivation. So if you want to take steps as an individual to avoid fly tipping, avoid cash offers. Always check for a waste carrier's license, and I will comment on how to do that in a second. If they can't show you a waste carrier's license, walk away. Any bona fide waste disposal contractor will be more than happy to show you a current waste management license. Even if they do, always ask where your waste is going to be disposed of. And if you're paying someone to take waste away and they tell you it's going to the local recycling centre as household waste, that's illegal. They can't do that. That's not what those sites are there for. And if they can't give you a sensible answer, walk away. Always ask for a receipt. If you're not going to get a receipt, walk away. So, excuse me a second. I talked about waste carrier's license. So there's a couple of things to look for in a waste carrier's license. A bona fide license will have either a CBD, CBDL, or CBDU prefix, shown here, circled in red. If the license doesn't have that prefix, one of those two prefixes, it is not a genuine license. But even if it does, it has to be in date. If the license is out of date, they're not a registered waste carrier. I cannot tell you the number of people that don't do this basic check. And you can check by contacting the Environment Agency on the number noted there. However, we in Hertfordshire think that the agency website isn't actually very good and very easy to use. So through a link on our website, we've made it much easier to access the online database. And if you're into emailing, you can email the agency, who are quite quick to respond. So, straight away, check for a waste license, and those are the sorts of things that you should be checking for. The format of the license changes every now and then. It's not always an A4 sheet, as it is here, but the license number and a relevant date are things you should always check for. Bear with me a second. Right, so let me give you an example of the typical thing that happens that results in a fly tipping incident. And again, these are people that these are your friends, potentially family members that will make this mistake. So this is the sort of leaflet that you'll get through a door. But let's just take a closer look at what we can see here. Okay, first and foremost, this is a tree surgeon that's offering tree and garden services, which ultimately will end up in them taking the waste away. Straight away, does anyone see a waste carrier's license or a registration number? I can't see one. A bona fide, properly licensed tree surgeon that has to be licensed to take waste away will have and publicize a waste carrier's license. So from my perspective as a householder, there's the first red flag. Okay, let's give them the benefit of the doubt and say they just forgot to put the number on there. So I go and then check the Environment Agency website for this K&G Tree and Garden Waste Services, and I can't find them. Second red flag. They have a website on the bottom. So I checked that out. It wasn't working. Third red flag. When I challenged them over where my waste was going to be disposed of, they were very, very vague. Okay, that's 4 questions, 4 red flags. So what conclusion can I reasonably draw from this? I wouldn't let these people on my property if they were paying me to do the job. There are so many red flags on this advert, and there are so many red flags in the question that I put them through. My conclusion was they were not a properly licensed tree surgeon. And I will go one stage further. Imagine you were having an extension built on your house. Yeah, I'd imagine as part of employing a builder, you would make sure that that builder had proper liability insurance whilst they were on your premises in case something significant happened. Yes. Why would you then not make the same checks against someone doing work on your garden? If they're cutting corners in terms of the waste management practices, what other corners are they cutting? And are these people that you really want to employ? Again, bona fide contractors do not make these mistakes. But you'll see adverts like this in local papers. You'll see adverts like this online. You'll see flyers come through the door. And otherwise very intelligent people will employ people such as this. And this is how the chain of decisions start that result in a fly tipping incident. So how to report fly tipping? Well, if you see it in action, do not ever try and interfere. Yes, there are videos on the internet and on YouTube where very brave individuals have personally and physically challenged fly tippers. I would never tell anyone to do that. Some of these individuals are very nasty people. They don't behave according to the same sort of rules that we do. Don't ever do it. If you can safely witness it, record it on a phone, great, but call the police. That's what they're there for. If you come across fly tipping after the fact, it's already been done, it's already been tipped, call your local borough or district council. Fly tipping 99% of the time is a local borough or district council, not the county council. Or alternatively, log onto our website, onto our fly tipping page, and go through the links that we provide. And below there are just some of the issues if you're going to report fly tipping that we'd ideally like. If you've seen it or suspect a vehicle, then its registration details would be ideal. Any description of the people involved, the direction of travel they took if you noted it, if you saw it happening, the exact location if you've got it. Most mobile phones these days allow you to pinpoint that, and there are a number of dedicated fly tipping apps that you can download. Date and time, details of the items dumped, but don't ever sift through fly tipping. Don't ever start pulling it apart because it's a very dangerous thing to do. And any photos that you could take on a mobile phone that would help. But when doing this, as it says on the bottom there, never ever put yourself at risk. Okay, that's it. I'll stop sharing now and I'll be happy to take questions. Feel free to put your cameras on, but unless you're asking a question, then if you could stay on mute, that would appreciate it. Helena, what questions do we have?
So we did have quite a few questions. There are a couple around the distinction between public and private land. So what is the proportion of incidents on public and private land? Do the numbers that you shared at the beginning include private land, or is it just those on public? And because it's dealt with by the landowner, what support can we offer them?
Yeah, okay, really good questions. You have to make sure I answer each of them. So what's the difference between public and private? In our world, public and private means land that's controlled by local authorities versus land that's controlled by other people. That said, we on occasion do run into problems where when we look on the land registry, we literally cannot determine who the landowner is. The local council isn't registered, there isn't a private landowner registered. There are a number of examples from around the country where, in essence, land doesn't have an official ownership record. So it's not 100% scientific. But our general distinction is it council land, council-controlled land? Or if not, it's generally regarded as private land. Do the numbers include private land fly tips? Where they're reported, yes. We have typically 2 types of reaction from private landowners. We'll get those private landowners, say a farmer that's been subject to a big fly tip. We'll assume it's a public authority responsibility. We'll phone up, find out it's not, and then because we won't come out and pay for its disposal, they refuse to engage with us. And from that point on, they tend not to report any incidents. And therefore, those records will not be part of our numbers. However, the majority realise that it's important to make sure the issue is on our radar as local authorities, especially in policy terms. and therefore they will report those numbers to the local council. And where they do, the local council will include those numbers in their monthly reports. And we believe we capture the vast majority of that in the numbers that we report to government. It's not a perfect system, and we are looking at ways to improve it. But where it is reported to us generally, it's included in the numbers that we report to government.
And what is the proportional split?
Right. I don't have that to hand, but I can tell you the vast majority, and I'm guessing it's going to be over 95% on public land. But you'd expect that because that's where most of our reporting and enforcement work is concentrated. So it's a slightly artificial number in that regard. The vast majority is on public land. And even if we had 100% reporting for private land, it would still be a very, very small percentage.
Thank you. There was a question about how did the 1920 figures compare to the 1819? I don't know if you have that to hand, but what I've said is that we can share a link to the annual report from that year, which does have
yes. As Helena has intimated, the partnership publishes an annual report every year, and section 5 of that report is dedicated to fly tipping, and that analysis is in there. 1920, from top of my memory, 1920 figures for 1920 were an 11% reduction on those reported for 1819 and a 26% reduction on the highs of 2016-17. We're yet to really, we haven't yet signed off the numbers for 2020-21, and we expect to see quite a big increase. But up until March 2020, we had started to get fly tipping on a nice downward trend. And 1920 as a year was the second lowest year on record since 2012.
Okay, there was another question about what proportion of offences result either in a fixed penalty notice or a prosecution.
Vast majority, I say vast majority. In terms of prosecutions or FPNs, the majority is FPNs. We don't achieve a lot of prosecutions in Hertfordshire. As you saw, Broxbourne, the second smallest borough in the county, is responsible for at least half the numbers for the county as a whole. So our enforcement capacity is not equal, and it's something that we are working on towards equalising. So we'd like to see much more prosecution, especially for the bigger fly tips. But where there is a punitive result, it's an FPN. Again, we can provide numbers outside of the main meeting. I don't have the split to hand, but we can provide the numbers for you.
Okay. This one is quite an interesting question. What can be done about the issue of fly tipping on rural roads? And the question posted said that quite a lot of time, if the villagers undertake a lot of work to clear the area, do some litter picking, and then they see an instance of fly tipping, if it enters a ditch, then the council won't clear it. Farmers can't afford to clear it, and if the villagers try to do it themselves, they often come into conflict with the council staff. Well,
if someone, if we put our Great British Spring clean hats on for a second, if there's an active community group that's going to go to the time and trouble of clearing a fly tipping spot in their village, then I can't think of any local government colleague that would object to supporting that. And quite frankly, if you do run into conflict with council employees, then please give me the details and I will sort that out for you. So, generally in Hertfordshire, we look to support such efforts, but there are some specific issues. So ditches is a very vexed one. There's something called riparian rights. And basically, if your land, and this includes householders, so imagine you and your neighbour have a ditch running between your house. As a householder, you have responsibility for that ditch to the halfway point of the ditch. Your neighbour would have responsibility for the other half. That responsibility also applies to farmers. So riparian rights is something that we're looking at the moment in terms of its practicality in the 21st century. But technically, if I had a large farmer that said to me, there's a ditch that borders my property that's blocked and causing my farm an issue, and part of my response initially would be, as a farmer, you are legally required to maintain that ditch. It comes under the Riparian Rights Act. Now, whether or not we can be a bit more sophisticated and see what help we can lend, that's another question, because that obviously has a significant public cost to it. Just slightly linked to that, one of the regular suggestions I get is that we would have no fly tipping if we opened up recycling centres and allowed all commercial waste to be tipped for free. Well, possibly, but I'd also suggest the cost would go through the roof. At £1 million cost a year, it's roughly equivalent to about 10,000 tonnes of waste, yeah? In Hertfordshire, we have 500,000 tonnes of commercial waste. So you can do the numbers for yourself. At £110 per tonne disposal, if we allowed all commercial waste in Hertfordshire to be disposed by the recycling centres, one, the centres couldn't cope with it physically, and two, as taxpayers, your costs would absolutely go through the roof. So that's why we don't do that.
That leads nicely on to another question, which was about would longer opening hours at recycling centres help ease or offer a legal route for disposal? I guess this would be regarding household waste rather than commercial. I have to say, if you bear in mind in 2019-20, we still had 11,200 incidents. The answer to that question has to be a yes. Within that, I'm sure we could find a number of examples where if the sites were open longer, someone might have been persuaded to go to the site and not fly to. Our issue is it material in terms of policy? Does the evidence suggest that there would be a significant impact on levels of fly tipping to justify the cost of longer opening hours? And that's the question in the data that we don't have. The one thing, unfortunately, that is quite common to fly tipping incidents is that those that fly tip, I'm going to be blunt now, don't care. I have this, I sometimes use this phrase, and I've always struggled to come up with a better one. Some fly tipping is accidental in that people get into a chain of decision making that isn't the best and results in them fly tipping when they don't mean to. So, for example, outside the charity shop is a good example of that. People think they're doing the right thing, but actually what they're doing is fly tipping. Watford has a particular issue with black bins next to street cleansing bins. People think they're doing the right thing by leaving properly tied up double bag black bags of their waste next to their bin because for whatever reason they can't cope with their household collection service. So their motivation is a good one, but it's fly tipping. So would it stop fly tipping? No, it wouldn't, because a lot of people that fly tip wouldn't care about the extra convenience of longer opening hours. That said, at the moment, the County Council, who last October, I think, Helen, if I'm right, took control of the recycling centres, took them back in-house, as we call it. They're currently conducting a survey looking to test whether or not there is a demand for providing a commercial waste service at some of their sites. And part of the motivation is to see whether that would help to stop some of this issue in some parts of the county. Absolutely. And another question we've already touched on the answer is about where can we get hold of some of the leaflets, because many residents aren't familiar with the steps that they should take. So incidental fly tipping is just purely because people don't know. Yeah,
it's a really, really great question. Basically, if you email myself or Helena, we can organise to do that for you, either through your local council that will hopefully have some left in stock, or, if we, for example, have a neighbourhood watch scheme. So I've done some work previously with one of the neighbourhood watch groups in Broxbourne, where they undertook to do a leaflet drop to a number of target areas in the borough. And we supported that through a dedicated print run to give them their own stock of leaflets. And we'd be very, very happy to do that for anyone who wants to undertake similar. And we would welcome that assistance, frankly.
Absolutely. I've just put our email addresses in the chat, so you can.
Great.
There. Another offer for support is, can local waste campaign groups help with lobbying?
Yes, it is. It is quite a technical area. We have a lobbying effort that's been going on now for the best part of 2 years, and it literally is the oil tanker that takes 6 miles to turn. We are making progress. What we can do, if people are interested in having conversations outside of this presentation, I could take people through what we're doing in more detail. And lobbying our local MPs is something that's always very worthwhile, and something that I've done on a regular basis over the last couple of years, as well as I've also targeted 3 key parliamentary committees that have or will be dealing with legislation, which are opportunities to get some fly tipping stuff in there. So that always helps. And if people are really seriously want to get involved in that, then again, I would suggest contact me and we can arrange a separate meeting via Zoom, if needs be, to look at that in more detail.
Another question is about social media and sharing the campaign. The question is about the small signs. Do you mean just the general campaign material? You're on mute. Would you like to unmute yourself?
Yes, you had a set of yellow and black signs saying duty of care and various things like those.
Yeah.
Yes, we do have a whole...
Yeah, on the village website, we regularly find people asking for contractors. If we regularly put those signs up, that would remind people what they're looking for when they're looking for a contractor.
Absolutely. So I'll tell you what we do. Davina, again, contact me outside of the meeting, and we will even if we just email you a copy of stuff you can have locally, or I have to think through this a little bit. We might be able to give you access to our online portal. Helen and I will sort out the best way to do it. But yes, we will get you the images that you can save locally, and then you can deploy it on a regular basis. We try to make sure each of our images are not time specific. So the idea is that images that were first created a couple of years ago are still completely and utterly relevant today. So we can certainly do that for you, and anyone else that would like to do that. We'd be more than happy to help you do that. And fundamentally, we view our residents and our residence group as part of our stakeholders, and if we can work together on that, then why not?
Okay.
I've also put a link in the chat to our Facebook page, and quite frequently we share the Flytipping campaign material, so you can always repost from that. We've also got a Twitter account, and we do the same. A question now about prosecutions, and do sentences include community service? So, for example, if the offenders were to clear the fly tips, would this offer a greater incentive to not reoffend compared to fines?
Technically, the sentencing guidelines do briefly comment on the use of community-based sentences, especially where, from our perspective, people claim an inability to pay a financial fine. However, they're not widely used, and when they are used, they're used inconsistently. I've referred to the guidelines a few times. The guidelines are, from memory, about a 15-page document. Basically, the magistrate has to go through the guidelines to decide the seriousness and magnitude of the offence in rendering a judgment, which is why quite often if you get two fly tipping offences which side by side are identical, the judgment will differ because one of the magistrate's disposition and two, the disposition of the defendant, as I indicated previously. And one of the areas where we think there could be a vast improvement is when we get defendants that turn up to court claiming they have no financial means. We think that fines where they have to pay £5 a month are an absolute joke and are not an inconvenience and don't motivate a change of behaviour. And one of the things we are pushing for, and we are about to launch a new front in our lobbying efforts with the Sentencing Council, is to have those guidelines reviewed. And part of that is to seek to get magistrates to use community-based sentencing on a much more regular basis. And ideally, that would be clearing up fly tipping or littering or both, to say, look, if you're going to be so-and-so and fly tip in your community, then your sentence is going to be based about clearing up fly tipping. So you can experience it firsthand, the stress, anxiety, and the disimmunity it causes, with the idea being that they are motivated never to do it again. It's not used as a regular tool, and we don't quite understand why, because it is in there. Therefore, we think the guidelines need to be much clearer in this respect. And when I talk about this lobbying effort, this is a lobbying effort that is being put together and led by Hertfordshire, but is being supported by authorities in Kent, in Hampshire, in Lincolnshire, and from across the country as a whole, where hopefully we'll have about 6 or 7 council leaders sign up to this. And we're scheduled to put together the final draft of this lobbying effort in the next couple of weeks. And hopefully it will motivate the Sentencing Council to prioritise the review of those guidelines.
Thank you. That was the last question that I had. Are there any others that anyone would like to ask? I don't see anyone coming off mute. Okay. If there are any other questions, then obviously you can contact either me or Duncan and we will respond after this session. So I would say thank you very much indeed to Duncan. I'm sure you will have found that interesting. Certainly a huge amount that the fly tipping group is undertaking to really reduce this problem, not just in Hertfordshire, but around the country. If I may, I'm just going to paste a few details in the chat. The first of which is a link to our monthly newsletter, which I send out. We've got about 10,000 residents signed up. We're always looking to share details with more people. So it's upcoming events, the different campaigns that we've got going on, including Flytipping, and suggestions and tips for reducing your waste. So do sign up if you'd like to find them. And then this is just at the beginning of the SustFest fortnight. So there are many other events coming up. So I'm just going to share with you what they are. We have 4 events left. So this afternoon I am talking about reusable nappies and how they can reduce the amount of waste that's being created in Hertfordshire. Currently it costs £1.7 million a year to dispose of disposable nappies. On Thursday we have an engagement with Becky Alexander, who is a local author, and she is telling us how we can change our world in our lunch break, with lots of practical tips on how you can reduce food waste, but also plastic and packaging. So that's going to be really quick, interesting. That is a quick session, that's just 45 minutes. On Friday, we're talking about plastic-free periods, all of the different options that are available now, that are very comfortable and convenient and cost less. And then finally, next week, we have the cutting edge of food waste. We are working with Veolia Watford and West Herts College, with young chefs giving some live food demos on how you can reduce the amount of wastage in your kitchen. So if you would like to join any of them, the link to Eventbrite is at the bottom of the chat. Thank you very much indeed, and I hope that we can engage with you another time.